This is a demo video of the Critical Objects button that has been inserted on the Rev-Trac Enforcement pop-up introduced in Rev-Trac Release 836 Change Ticket RVS 1964. As an overview, this button has been placed on the Enforcement pop-up to help developers navigate the impact of Rev-Trac features, sensitive objects, and the whitelist functionality. Sensitive objects or the whitelist functionality can be used by Rev-Trac administrators to govern what changes can be attached to what Rev-Trac requests by developers, effectively binding certain changes to certain processes. This demo will basically be contained in two parts. The first part will see how this new button can be used by a developer to help navigate the impact of their development by the sensitive objects feature. And in the second part, we can see how this new button can help a developer navigate the impacts to the changes by the whitelist feature. So firstly, let's go into the Rev-Trac console and look at the sensitive objects configuration that will be used in this demonstration. So these highlighted entries will basically mean that any ABAP developer that comes in is attempting to make a change to an existing program or create a new program based on this naming standard will be forced to associate the transport with their changes to a Rev-Trac request belonging to these two specific project request type combinations. We can see for these project request type combinations that both belong to a common project but two different request types, BAU or dev for common project sub_rel. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to an SAP development transaction, attempt to update a program that has this naming standard, and we'll see how this new Critical Objects button can help the developer navigate it. Okay, so here's the Rev-Trac Enforcement screen, and we can see here there's a new button called Critical Object. So before we enter that new feature, let's just, as a developer, put in a Rev-Trac request you may be familiar with, but does not actually belong to the project request type stipulated in the sensitive object rule that is going to impact this particular object we are trying to change. So now we're showing this report that's split into two sections. The top of the report is effectively telling us what sensitive object rules are in place that are impacting the object I'm trying to change. This is a good area to help the developer navigate to an appropriate Rev-Trac request, because we see the rules have two project request type combinations, and if you double click on the line, it actually gives you a work in progress Rev-Trac request that actually is applicable for this object to be attached. So 1983 for this project request type combination, just cancel, go to the next line, 1982 for the second project request type combination. Hit cancel, and the second half to the screen, we can see that the proposed Rev-Trac request that we set to the enforcement screen has been validated as whether it's applicable for this particular change. And we can see here that the Rev-Trac request that we selected, 1980, belongs to a project request type not supported by the sensitive objects set against this object. And we can so the validity column is set to X, and we've got some messages here to say that to give more explanation to the developer of why it can't be selected. So let's just cancel out of here. And let's say even a user can come back here if they want. Hit refresh, go to Critical Object, and we can see that the alternative Rev-Trac request number that they've put in has been validated and flagged as being applicable for this object belonging to the sensitive object rules. Hit the back button, Select continue. And we've been able to proceed. Okay, for the second part of this demonstration, let's do a very similar test. But in this case, we'll see how developer can use this feature to navigate a whitelist that's impacting an object. So let's go back to the Rev-Trac console and let's have a look at the whitelist configuration that will be impacting this second part of the demo. We'll be using this whitelist, just called rt_cust. And what this effectively means that a project request type configured with this whitelist will only be able to have customizing objects attached to it. Let's go back to an SAP developer transaction and see how the new critical objects button can be used to navigate an object impacted by this whitelist. Okay, so we're now attempting to change this ABAP program. This ABAP program is not subject to any whitelist or sensitive object. However, we're going to attempt to save this, change this object to a Rev-Trac request configured with the whitelist we've just previously seen. Let's select Rev-Trac Request 1984 belonging to a project request type with that whitelist. Okay, we now know that a critical objects button is displayed. Let's select it. Okay, so let's look at this screen. The top half of the screen tells us that the object that we're attempting to change hasn't been flagged as a critical object. It's not in any whitelist or sensitive objects configuration. In the second part of the screen, though, it's validated that this object is not valid for the selected project request type. For the Rev-Trac request, we entered in at the enforcement screen because that Rev-Trac request belongs to a project request type configured with that whitelist, which means that only objects that are defined in a whitelist can be added to that Rev-Trac request. And in this case, it's only customizing objects. So if we can double click on this message under here, we can see that it's given us the reason why that the object cannot be attached, because this Rev-Trac request is impacted by this whitelist object rule. Okay. So let's now go to a customizing screen where we can attempt to save customizing changes to this same Rev-Trac request, and we'll see how this interacts with the critical object feature. Okay, here's enforce on pop-up. We do have it is locked. It's advice only. We can ignore that for the purposes of the demo. But there's a critical objects button displayed. Let's select it. The top half of the report is now informing us that this object has actually been defined in whitelists. Select the back button. Now we're going to select the same Rev-Trac request we used in a previous transaction. We know that this belongs to a whitelist. There's applicable for this customizing changes. We can see that now that the critical objects feature has validated this Rev-Trac request as being applicable for these customizing changes. And it successfully saved the configuration changes to Rev-Trac request 1984. This is the completion of the demo, and in summary, this new feature allows an app developer to navigate the impacts of development by either the sensitive objects or the whitelist functionality configured in Rev-Trac.